say to somebody from Minnesota, let's take a road trip, the first road that's going to come to their mind is Highway 61, because that's the most adventuresome, nostalgic, interesting, diverse, intriguing. It's got the most quirks to it. I mean, it's the most interesting road in the state.
Hello, I'm Toussaint Morrison, and welcome to Minnesota Experience. We have a treat for you this week. It's a documentary that highlights the history along Minnesota's most colorful roadway. Highway 61 runs from the Canadian border along Lake Superior all the way down to the southeastern tip of the state, where the Mississippi River heads south into Iowa. Kathy Wurzer is your tour guide as she travels the 400-plus-mile journey in a 1946 Cadillac. So buckle up and enjoy the ride as we present Tales of the Road, Highway 61.
The first blush of America's torrid love affair with the car happened just about the time Highway 61 was being built. It was the early 1920s. Parts of the now familiar highway were either under construction, dusty stretches of dirt, or a rutted path through the woods. Travelers didn't seem to mind. They took to the road in droves.
But when the road system began to take place, or be established as an integrated net, it really freed up everybody.
There was a sense of freedom and adventure that greeted those early highway explorers. There was always something new to see.
But now, many of those sites along the way are just lost bits of highway history, kind of like 18-cent a gallon gasoline. Hi, I'm Kathy Wurzer. You know, a modern-day road trip can still hold that sense of adventure, and it's made richer by knowing the stories of what's along the road and what used to be there. We're using a special little-known book for our trip.
It's the WPA Guide to Minnesota, published in 1938. It was the first tour guide of its kind. Compiled during the Great Depression by a small band of teachers, preachers, writers, and editors who needed the work, the Road Guide was one of the creations of the Federal Writers Project, a government-subsidized program.
I can characterize those guidebooks very simply as introducing the United States to itself.
And it was quite an introduction.
I see Highway 61 is the first tour in this old WPA Road Guide. And this is the start of the original Highway 61. We're by Grand Portage, right on the Pigeon River, and this was the first border crossing between Minnesota and Canada. That old faded Canadian flag over there marks the spot where the guard shack was on that side of the river.
Very few traces remain of what was a very busy place. Hidden in the thick stands of pine are some tiny tourist cabins, but not much else. What was a rollicking river crossing is little more than a ghost town.
And across the road it was cabin. It was down by past the gas station. It was a service bay where they did tire repair and oil changes and stuff.
I think $2 a night for a cabin?
$2-3, yeah, that's all they were.
Larry and Daryl Ryden grew up at the border, along with several other siblings and their parents, Mabel and Ed Ryden.
The weekends were very busy. The fishermen come through. You couldn't get through customs, so everybody just lined up one behind the other.
There was a steel bridge across the Pigeon River when the Rydens lived here. Just the footings remain now. But in 1917, there was a wooden bridge that spanned the river, and folks called it the Outlaw Bridge. It earned its nickname because it was built without official approval from either the U.S. or Canadian governments. Businessmen from both sides of the border paid for it. Bootleggers and others hoping to pull one over on customs agents would try and smuggle booze across the bridge, adding more mystique to the outlaw moniker. The confiscated liquor and beer was even something the young Ryden boys capitalized on.
The officials from Thunder Bay would come down to destroy it, and that's when they would take it to the bridge.
The beer would kind of go in shallow water and the whiskey a little deeper water, so it wasn't hard to pick up. Then we'd climb down there, even when we were throwing it, and pick it up and sell it for 10 cents a can. Probably back to the officers, I don't know.
Things changed in the 1960s. Plans were made to close the old border crossing and move a crumbling Highway 61 from its winding route in the woods to a smoother stretch along Lake Superior. So the Ryden family moved their business and the customs office, lock, stock, and barrel, about 6 miles downstream to where it is today, leaving behind some very good memories.
It was a fun place, got no regrets.
Pretty good enterprise. That was real tranquility.
Where'd you find that word?
The Rydens have quite a story, and since there are so many more down the highway, let's start her up and see where the road leads next.
The old road used to run inland, away from Lake Superior, from the Pigeon River to Grand Marais. It went through Mineral Center, a ghost town today, down through another village that no longer exists on the map. The town may be gone, but a special place still remains at the site of what was Chippewa City.
When I stand on Chippewa Beach and look up to see the church, it is the only remnant of my grandfather.
For Briand Morrison, the Church of St. Francis Xavier has played a significant role in his family's history. Founded in 1895 by Jesuit priests, the simple split-log church was part of a missionary effort to convert local Ojibwe Indians to Christianity.
But when this traveling priest wasn't here to give sermons, people from the community stood up and conducted sermons in Ojibwe. And the traditions were a blend of Catholicism and the old Ojibwe way.
So you'd sing the Ave Maria in the Chippewa language. It was beautiful.
The church became the heart of Chippewa City with its bell calling people to worship, but to also announce bad news, a death or another serious situation.
Some of the people who lived here often talked about that bell being a harbinger, a bittersweet harbinger of, something happening in the community.
Chippewa City used to be home to 200 to 300 people. It was a close-knit community, but that changed during the Great Depression when Indian residents started losing their property. The introduction of Highway 61 didn't help either, cutting through the heart of the town. Ironically, the road followed an old Indian path.
My dad tells a great story about his Uncle Charlie Droulard, who one day was walking back from Grand Marais back to this area in Chippewa City, and he was walking right down the middle of the road. And so some of the local authorities stopped him and said, "Why on earth are you walking down the middle of the road?" And he looked at him and he said, "I'm Charlie Droulard, and you built the road on my trail."
The Droulards worshipped at St. Francis. So did famed artist George Morrison and his family. Morrison's grandfather, Jim, was one of the church elders.
It holds a special place in my heart. For our family and for just the historical reasons. It is a remnant of that time.
When George Morrison died in the year 2000, he was memorialized in the same church his family helped build. He was laid to rest in the nearby Chippewa City Cemetery. Morrison's was the first service the church had seen in years. The last official mass occurred in 1936. St. Francis Xavier Church remained empty, unused and run down for years after, until it was turned over to the Cook County Historical Society and restored, reclaiming its place in North Shore history.
The thing that has always struck me about the church is that it was here before the highway, it was here before the harbor, it was here before the World Wars, and the door kind of turns its back on the highway. And I think it's symbolic of how it's stood the test of time.
Highway 61, especially along the North Shore, is nearly irresistible to travelers. Lake Superior practically pulls you toward it, daring you not to look. Along the highway in Elgin City, a guy named Rudy Elgin had a hunch early on that the North Shore would be a tourist magnet. He was right.
They were true pioneers. Yeah, they couldn't, outside of not going west in a covered wagon, they did everything else that the pioneers did, I tell you.
Rudy and Mary Elgin actually did a little more than most pioneers. They single-handedly built a hotel in the 1920s in the North Shore wilderness with a rutted dirt road nearby that was to become Highway 61. Rudy Elgin was an inventive guy, a dreamer, a hard-working German immigrant who was an early booster of North Shore tourism. The Elgin family built the Aztec Hotel, patterned after the Aztec Indian temples Rudy saw on trips to Mexico as a young man. It was, shall we say, an unusual architectural choice for northern Minnesota.
To begin with, was viewed as kind of strange, that strange German down there building this odd hotel and stuff. And but then as time went by, it became an interesting place for people to stop.
And folks did stop for the chicken dinners, the silent films shown in the lobby, or the oddball artifacts Rudy had sprinkled around the hotel. As more people took to the highway, Rudy's fertile mind sprouted another idea, the cabinola.
It was strictly for the traveling tourist trade, as he called it.
Named for each of the states, the cabinolas, a design Rudy patented, were tiny, standalone structures. At $3 a night and right by Lake Superior, the Cabinola Court was a big hit. This is one of the last surviving cabinolas Rudy Elgin made. Welcome to Kentucky. Imagine staying here after a long haul from the Twin Cities. This was no-frills vacationing at its most basic, which is exactly what tourists were looking for after World War II. Sadly, the cabinolas were removed to make way for the new alignment of Highway 61. The Aztec Hotel burned in 1958. All that remains of Rudy Elgin's tourism empire is the Whispering Pines Motel that was built in 1956. There isn't much else, except the signs. Anyone who's ever traveled Highway 61 knows there are more sights to see than time in which to see them. That's why I brought along my trusty Brownie camera with which to capture the moments that I don't have time to linger over. You know it, you love it, you can't do a North Shore trip without it. Split Rock Lighthouse, one of the most photographed sites in all of Minnesota. Oh, that's a good picture. Just a few miles down 61 from Gooseberry State Park are two marvels of engineering that changed the course of the road. The original alignment of the highway went up and around two towering rock outcroppings, Lafayette Bluff and Silver Creek Cliff. It was dangerous work dynamiting the granite off the face of those cliffs so the highway could cling precariously off the side. It was a breathtaking but heart-stopping ride, especially along Silver Creek Cliff. In the 1990s, the road was made safer when crews blasted through the rock, creating today's tunnels. It took several years and the removal of about 1 million tons of rock to create both passageways. The ride isn't as adventuresome, but the view is still beautiful. One of the intriguing parts of this trip is the discovery of bits of history scattered alongside the road. You know, we're on Scenic 61 right now between Two Harbors and Duluth, and there's a site I want to show you. It's really interesting. It's got a great history to it, and it's kind of tough to find. You're apt to blow by it and miss it. Oh, wait a minute, here it is. All right, I know this doesn't look like much, but this place once had ties to the very early days of American movie making. Right here stood a theater whose dashing impresario had roots that stretched back to a time when movie making was brand new. Paul Gilmore was one of the first actors to embrace the newfangled technology called moving pictures. With his dark, good looks, the handsome native of Milwaukee, Wisconsin had parts in several early films of the late 1890s and early teens. But his reputation as a leading man was originally earned on the stage. Gilmore, as was customary at the time, would travel the country in elaborate stage productions. Although he's a footnote in theater history today, in his time, Paul Gilmore was celebrated by the public and the press.
He was more than a well-established actor. He was a name actor. He was a star. And I had seen, in looking at old pictures down at the old Metropolitan Theater in downtown Minneapolis, I remember the one picture very well, and his name was up in lights.
Gilmore acted in at least 10 silent films, the last of which was in 1920. The Isle of Destiny was bankrolled by Gilmore himself and shot on Anna Maria Island, Florida, a beach area he had hoped to turn into a film colony that would rival Hollywood. It didn't work. Nearly broke, Gilmore went back to New York and helped found the Cherry Lane Theater, which became the longest-lived off-Broadway theater in the city. So what on earth does this slab of concrete have to do with Gilmore? Paul and his daughter Virginia, herself a budding actress, would vacation along the pollen-free North Shore to alleviate their hay fever symptoms. As they drive to Duluth through the Twin Cities, the pair would stop to see Don Stoltz, a familiar actor in these parts and the founder of the Old Log Theater in Excelsior.
They looked elegant, and he represented to me a part of theater that no longer existed, because I knew he had been a big star, and but you know, he wasn't like so many older actors who have been big in their time. He was not unhappy with what he was doing.
What the aging Paul Gilmore was doing was building a theater along the North Shore. The Gilmore Comedy Theater, which Paul called modern architecture personified, fireproof, sunproof, and bomb-proof, opened in July of 1949. Father and daughter were in starring roles. They continued their summer theater productions until 1957, when they asked Don Stoltz to take it over. He did, for a season.
More charming than I had expected it to be, because, you know, you say a theater in a Quonset hut, but they had done a good job of converting it into a theater, I thought. And I loved the view. It's hard to beat.
A view of the lake is all that's left. The theater was torn down a few years later and was gone by the early 1960s. Paul, once a big star, faded away and died in 1962 at the age of 89. All plays have a final act, and the North Shore Theater along Highway 61 was Paul Gilmore's. A few miles down the road in Duluth is the old Duluth Armory. The building has been here since 1915, serving first as a training center for National Guard units in World War I. In later years, the Armory played host to a whole bunch of entertainers, including the legendary African-American performer Paul Robeson. In January of 1959, there was a concert at the Armory that featured rock and roller Buddy Holly. In the audience that night, an aspiring musician from Hibbing named Robert Zimmerman.
One time when I was about 16 or 17 years old, I went to see Buddy Holly play at Duluth National Guard Armory, and I was 3 feet away from him, and he looked at me.
And the rest is music history. Zimmerman went on to become the legendary Bob Dylan, with Dylan and Highway 61 forever tied together. The WPA Road Guide and Highway 61 take us out of Duluth to Carlton and then on to Barnum.
Barnum, Minnesota is just one of many small towns that dot Highway 61, and this is a good place to tell a little chicken and egg story.
And we'll start the story at the Carlton County Fair in Barnum. The folks are friendly, but when it comes to the county's prize-winning farm animals, the competition is fierce. These look like ordinary chickens, but they aren't just any run-of-the-mill animals. The ancestors of these white leghorn chickens helped save the town of Barnum. Barnum was a struggling little town more than 100 years ago. The logging industry had dried up. The largest business in the village, the creamery, was floundering despite the best efforts of local farmers. That's when H.C. Hansen, the founder of the State Bank of Barnum, came up with an idea.
Hansen called together all the area farmers and proposed a unique idea. He said he'd buy this old creamery and find markets for everyone's eggs and milk if farmers agreed to specialize in one kind of chicken and one breed of cow. Hansen figured that if egg and milk production were successful, his bank and the town would be too.
Hansen was right. The banker and his neighbors decided to raise Guernsey cows and white leghorn chickens. They sold stock and modernized the creamery. In a few short years, Barnum and its creamery were on the map. And Barnum butter, milk, and eggs were found in refrigerators across the country.
Well, that was the best on the market. Barnum was noted for their butter. There was butter shipped to Chicago and New York by rail, same as the eggs.
As for the eggs, just as fast as a chicken could cross the road, several hatcheries in the area grew into some of the biggest in the nation, with their eggs sent to the finest New York City restaurants. Barnum's Guernsey cows, with their rich milk they made such tasty butter, began winning awards. Many of those prize cows were sold to breeders across the country. Some went as far away as China. Its reputation burnished by its cows and chickens, Barnum became a booming little town. The Barnum Creamery, one of its biggest and best-known businesses. Highway 61 ran right through town and past Lester Dusler's Cafe.
We had a big business at the restaurant. Before the freeway went through, the deer hunters was going up the highway. You could, if we wanted to cross from the restaurant over to the creamery across the road, you'd wait for 40, 50 cars sometimes before you got through there.
A few miles away, east of Barnum, is Tom and Sonia Dusler's farm. In the pasture, a herd of Guernsey cows, one of the few left in Carleton County.
Come on. Get up here.
Tom Dusler, Lester's son, remembers a time when the Barnum Creamery was a big business until about 1961.
That was start of things changing because other places that were bigger thought that they can make money with this little place, and this little place got bought.
And the Barnum Creamery, a mainstay of the local economy for decades, closed for good soon after that. The town took another blow in 1969 when Interstate 35 opened. The freeway drained traffic off of Highway 61 and away from Barnum's Main Street businesses.
Well, people was just in too big a hurry. They didn't have time to drive downtown.
Dusler's coffee shop closed. So did a number of other businesses. Barnum has changed, but one building remains in the same spot as it has since 1895. Empty now, but full of history. The old Barnum Creamery. Underneath the rolling grasslands outside of Barnum, around Moose Lake and Wrenchell, lie deposits of rich, earthy clay. Clay that's key to our next story along the highway.
This is part of my collection here, Nemadji pottery, and what I like to call it is eye candy.
It's great.
Because it really pops.
Eye-popping, eye-catching, however you want to describe it. Nemadji pottery is very distinctive, and nowadays, very collectible. And it all began at a little pottery in Moose Lake. Decorative tiles made from local clay were some of the first products crafted by the Nemadji Tile and Pottery Company in 1923. The earth-toned tiles were installed in places like the chapel at the College of St. Catherine in St. Paul, and in the Nemadji Pottery's own backyard at the Moose Lake High School. The tiles were very popular and were also found in the finest homes throughout the country.
But then that kind of fell off during the Depression. People just weren't building as much. And so Mr. Dodge started developing the pottery.
Clayton James Dodge, a shrewd businessman and a co-owner of the pottery, thought it made sense to expand into a broader market. Think tourists. That decision sparked the creation and the legend of Nemadji Indian pottery.
Nemadji pottery expresses the soul of the Arrowhead country and of the red man, who, though long since gone to the happy hunting ground, still haunts our shores and woods.
They used to ask what tribe made it. I said, the Wallstrom tribe.
We never promoted it as made by Indians. We said we tried to make it similar or something to that effect.
Wally and Dorothy Wallstrom made Nemadji pottery for decades, buying the Moose Lake operation from Dorothy's parents, who, in turn, purchased the modest little pottery from the Dodge family. The creatively fabricated history of Nemadji pottery that was tucked inside each piece captured the imagination of tourists across the country in the 1930s and 40s, almost as much as did the wild swirls of color in the pots themselves. Nemadji pottery was a big hit.
It seems like it was a fairly big business for a time in Moose Lake.
It was. In fact, I always liken it that this company saved the community, especially during the Depression. Now, nobody ever got rich on Nemadji tile or pottery, but it fed people during the Depression.
The pottery was moved to this building in nearby Kettle River in the early 1970s after Wally and Dorothy Wallstrom sold it. It's closed now. No more pottery is being made, but the myth and the magic of Nemadji lives on.
Nemadji holds a special place here in the Northland, and especially on Highway 61. So to me, it's special, and I know that there are avid collectors out there throughout the country that boast collections just as large as mine. You never have enough Nemadji.
You never do.
Nemadji pottery was a staple in some of those early roadside tourist stops. And after a long day on the road, the Motor Hotel, or Motel, was the next stop for many travelers. This one in Sandstone is a classic.
Well, we're at the site of the old Rush City Ferry. I wanted to take a quick picture with my trusty Brownie camera.
For 100 years, there were only 2 bridges across the St. Croix River, but 6 ferries, much like this one at Marine on St. Croix, made the trip back and forth between Minnesota and Wisconsin every day. Rush City was another heavily traveled ferry crossing.
This place used to buzz with activity. In the years after World War II, it would cost you 50 cents to cross the river. During Prohibition, it was said that bootleggers who had stills in Wisconsin would use the Rush City Ferry to move their booze back and forth. Nowadays, this is a boat landing, and you can barely see the submerged footings of the old Rush City Ferry dock.
Highway 61 flows past White Bear Lake and directly alongside one of the most historic sites for sailboat racing enthusiasts in the country, the Johnson Boat Works.
He was known as the inventor.
John O. Johnson was a quiet man with a restless mind. The boatworks that bore his name was started in 1896, and the building remains to this day, a stone's throw from the shores of White Bear Lake. The area was a fine spot to set up a boat-building business. At the time, White Bear Lake was the center of a very competitive sailboat racing scene, involving wealthy men with names like Ordway and Griggs. The sailboats at the time plowed through the water. John O., the story goes, would watch the bow of Norwegian whaling ships he'd been on as a young man, watched how the water would flow out into the side, like wings, which gave him ideas for a unique boat design.
Some of them laughed at it and said it looks like a floating pancake, and they didn't think it was going to do very well. But it did. The first race, it left everybody behind.
The head-turning performance of the boat, christened the Minnezitka, led to the creation of a class of wooden racing sailboats called A-scows.
Okay, it's coming about.
The scows skim over the water incredibly fast, gliding over the surface with ease.
It's a flat bottom, rounded sides or bilges, and so when the boat's heeled up, it's on that little curve, and so it's almost like a canoe in a sense. The rest of the boat isn't in the water at all, and so it has the minimum amount of drag.
The design was so revolutionary, a model of the Minnezitka remains to this day in the Smithsonian.
It just boggles my mind that he could do that and kind of see it through to the end and have such a belief in what he was doing that he was doing the right thing, because he put a lot into it, and I think he laid it all kind of out there. He risked it all.
Here inside the boatworks, John O., a handful of craftsmen, and eventually his sons, began hand-building the wooden A-boats, as many as 100 every year.
You come in the door, and the first thing you notice was a wonderful aroma of white cedar wood.
They were amazing craftsmen. They all had their bib overhauls on. They had their engineer hats. They had, their shoes were like thick with glue droppings. I mean, it was all the things you looked at. as a little kid, and you'd go, ooh. You know?
Eventually, Johnson Boat Works moved to building fiberglass boats before getting out of the boat-building business in the 1990s.
Driving right now.
Happily, the last wooden A-boat built by Johnson Boat Works is still on White Bear Lake, still racing and winning. John O. Johnson would no doubt be pleased that his legacy sails on.
Wherever we've traveled, and it can be virtually anywhere, sooner or later you kind of run, if there's someone that sails anywhere, really in the world, chances are pretty high that they heard of Johnson Boat Works.
I think we need a little driving music to get us down the road. Now, Highway 61's north-south route runs right through the east side of St. Paul, down Arcade Street. That's a familiar route for East-Siders. 61 used to turn on 6th Street in St. Paul. It now travels down 7th before heading south on Mounds Boulevard. US 61 has been on Arcade Street since 1926.
We've stopped by this little cemetery in Newport to talk about a site that used to be pretty near here, right off of Highway 61. The WPA road guide said it had historical and spiritual importance to some of the folks buried here. The centerpiece of the site also had sacred significance to the original residents of the area.
A small forest of oil storage tanks and blocks of warehouses stand where souls were saved, and before that, where natives came to pay their respects. This was the site of Red Rock. The road guide describes it as a small settlement. Nowadays, a bar remains in the general area of what was essentially a tiny town. But long before the site was erased by industrial development, hundreds of years ago, there was a geologic mystery that sat close to the riverbanks, right where that dock is now. Native Dakota Indians found a huge granite boulder there. It was very much out of place for the environment.
This is a granitic rock, and all the river bluffs there are made out of limestone and sandstone. So how is this big boulder sitting on the riverbank? How did it get there? Doesn't make any sense. Water can't move it. Didn't come off the top of the cliff. So basically, a lot of the Dakota revered these things that were mysterious. Their word for it is wakan.
The Dakota felt the rock was powerful because of its mystery. So they painted it red and left offerings of eagle feathers and other items.
They really don't go there to worship. What they go there to do is pay their respects. I mean, this is where there's a lot of power. You don't want to offend it, so let's go and show that we respect the deity that resides in this rock or moved it there. And so it's all about paying respect.
A white Methodist missionary by the name of Benjamin Kavanaugh arrived in the 1830s and noticed with interest the devotion the Dakota had toward Red Rock.
So he thought, if I build my church right next to the Red Rock, maybe I can say, well, as long as you guys are here worshiping that, why don't you come inside and I can show you a better thing to worship?
The Indian missionary work ultimately didn't pan out for the Reverend Kavanaugh, but he did start the first Protestant church for white settlers near the Red Rock.
June 25th, 1876. We were at the Red Rock camp meeting.
Religious revival meetings, camp meetings, popular elsewhere in the country, drew thousands of souls to Red Rock who sought the Lord among the trees and the tents.
Mrs. Amanda Smith preached. She delivered an excellent sermon on holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord and live.
You had people praying, people preaching, people singing hymns together, people taking communion, and it was called a camp meeting because people came from miles and miles away.
There was a large number of people on the campground today, and I trust some souls brought to believe in Christ.
You could call it kind of a religious Woodstock.
Some of the early camp meetings could get pretty wild. Red Rock was a little more tame, but popular preachers drew as many as 30,000 by the 1890s. But after a time, things started to change.
One side wanted to keep revivals going. The other wanted to have some interesting educational speakers who would also inspire you.
By the 1930s, the camp meetings dwindled, and the rock was moved several times. It's still considered sacred by the Dakota, but it's also significant to Methodists. It remains with them outside the Newport United Methodist Church. One of Minnesota's grandest mansions is on Highway 61 in Hastings. It has quite a history. Some people remember its past as an antique shop. That may have amused its original owner, William Gates LeDuc. LeDuc was a fascinating man. very intelligent with big dreams and ambitions. He and his wife Mary arrived in Hastings in 1857 and began planning their home.
I think they had a lot of dreams about what this would lead to, besides just a beautiful home to live in.
Work began on the home in 1862, but problems quickly cropped up.
The Civil War began, and LeDuc left to fight in it, about the time construction on the 15-room Gothic cottage started. Wartime shortages of labor and materials set the project back, as did LeDuc's chronic cash flow problems.
It really became a burden for them in more ways than one.
What began as a home that was supposed to cost $2,000 ended up costing LeDuc 15 times that sum, a whopping $30,000.
The family moved into the unfinished mansion in 1865. It wasn't until January of 1866 when the front doors were finally installed. From outward appearances, the LeDucs were well off, but appearances were a bit deceiving. LeDuc never had the kind of wealth he aspired to.
He was of such a spirit that he kept on and kept on, trying to discover what the next venture would be. It seemed that he always got there a day too late. Someone beat him to it.
It's ironic that while LeDuc tried tirelessly to strike it rich, it was his daughters who had the best business sense and were the most successful.
And then this stitching here would be something that they would contract.
The LeDuc girls started the Hastings Needlework Company quietly out of the mansion in 1901.
What we believe is Florence was the one that started the business, and that then the sister, Alice, and then her mother, and then the niece, Edith Gardner, also were the principals of the business.
Genteel women would dabble in needlework, called fancy work at the time. But what is astonishing is that the LeDuc women made a business out of their craft, creating patterns and then selling the products.
In a letter that Florence wrote to her father, it says, "With our little fancy work business, we earn between $200 and $300 a year." And so, depending on what kind of multiplier you use, if you look at how that equates in current dollars, it could be as much as $5,000.
And that was real money in any era. Hastings Needlework did so well, the LeDucs employed 15 to 20 local women to help. They turned out lovely, carefully crafted, hand-stitched tablecloths, napkins, towels, and other items for wealthy customers across the country. Mr. LeDuc would have approved, as he likely also would have enjoyed knowing that the mansion, that drained a lot of his money, looks more grand than ever.
It is a rare gem.
And because of preservation efforts, it will be enjoyed by generations to come. The city of Red Wing has always been a destination. It's a port on the Mississippi River, and it's a major stop for tourists on Highway 61. Red Wing is known for its pottery and for its shoes. But one of my favorite places in Red Wing is the T.B. Sheldon Theater. The Sheldon was the first municipal theater in the country. It raised its curtains in 1904 and has been operating ever since, allowing for renovations and a couple of long closures due to fire. The first fire was in 1918, which did more than $40,000 in damage. The second fire happened in 1986, just before a major renovation was to occur. But like the gilded phoenix in the theater's lobby, the Sheldon rose from the ashes a second time, reopening in 1988 and looking much like it did in its early days. It was called a jewel box when it first opened, and it's a description that is apt today. What a stunning place. Now, rumor has it that the theater is haunted. The manager and some performers have reported odd happenings at the Sheldon, lights going on and off, elevators going up and down at weird times. I guess that's why the ghost light is always left on backstage. I think Highway 61 has two distinct personalities. To the north, the road hugs the shores of Lake Superior, and there's a wilderness feel to the drive. In the south, the road glides along the Mississippi River bluffs, and there's a more pastoral atmosphere. Locals used to call the road between La Crosse and St. Paul the River Road, That was until 1920, when a constitutional amendment created Minnesota's first highway system, and the road was renamed U.S. Highway 3. It became U.S. Highway 61 in 1926. Along the old route, there are long forgotten bridges and bridge footings tucked away in the woods, and lengthy ribbons of original road that remain between Red Wing and Weaver, Minnesota. Reed's Landing is along the road. It used to be quite a boom town. For a brief time in the 1860s, it was even considered a potential site for the state capital. It was a thriving grain port and logging town. Now it's pretty quiet. The highway cut right through the heart of Reed's Landing, and only a few original buildings are left, like the school, which dates back to 1870. At the time, it was only the second such brick school in the state, and the town, flush with cash, paid a whopping $8,000 to build it. Now it's the home of the Wabasha County Historical Society, with its treasure trove of artifacts that dates back to a time when Reed's Landing was one of the most important cities in the state.
We're just north of Winona in Minnesota City, and this place is one of my favorites. It's got quite a story. Let's go take a look. I know it may be hard to imagine today, but this unassuming building behind me used to be the hottest nightclub between the Twin Cities and Chicago.
If you got here early in the evening, you could park somewhere in front. But by the time the evening was getting going at full tilt, you were parking a quarter mile away down the road. It was solid.
Hard to believe this was the Oaks, a glitzy, glamorous supper club that was the place to be in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s.
After you came in the door, maybe spent a little time in the bar, then it was time to come on into the dining room, and you walk through here, and all of a sudden, boom, this is where the activity was.
Walt Kelly literally grew up at the Oaks. His parents owned the establishment. And yes, those are the Three Stooges with young Walt. You never knew who was going to show up at the Oaks.
Did you have big acts at the time?
Lawrence Welk, Sammy Kaye. Yeah, many of the big name bands were here on a fairly regular basis. We had comedians, we had jugglers, we had quite a variety. It was like the Ed Sullivan Show in Winona on a Saturday night.
Kind of a regular Vegas kind of feel.
Absolutely.
Paint me a picture here. What did this look like?
Kind of goes back. You would see the big circular neon lights that looked like flying saucers up there, and especially when they reflected off the windows. And it was almost a sea of tables out through the whole area. There were 10 different stations for waitresses. Each one had her own area of the dining room.
The dining room could seat 600 diners, and orchestrating it all was the chef himself, Walt Kelly Sr.
He had his tall hat, he had his white jacket. He would come out into the dining room. You could see him when he came in. He wasn't all that tall, but you could see him, and he would stop at one person's table, and then he'd spot somebody else. Mr. Businessman, do you know Senator so-and-so? Might I introduce you? And he would take the person in tow across the dining room.
The master chef also introduced Winona to fine cuisine, launching what turned out to be a very popular smorgasbord. Gastronomical delights, all you could eat, for the sum of $2. The fine food, the entertaining floor shows, and the exciting atmosphere had the place packed. The Oaks even boasted of having an 87-foot-long bar that had 10 bartenders going at the same time. There are wonderful stories that are contained within the walls of the building that used to be the Oaks. The mammoth dining room now plays host to pieces of equipment. It's a machine shop. But you can still see remnants of what this place used to be. And maybe, if you listen closely, you can still hear echoes of the big band music and Chef Kelly's rolling laugh as he welcomed his guests.
Let's follow the multitudes of daily visitors into the offices and factories of this mighty $20 million international company and learn interesting things about the oldest and largest institution of its kind.
This is the worldwide headquarters of Watkins Incorporated. Even our WPA road guide talks about Watkins. It says Its liniment, good for man or beast, was a popular product in a town that specialized in harness making. Well, horse and buggy days are long gone, but Watkins is still here.
The liniment at that time was kind of a cure-all. There wasn't much for medicines available to settlers in the prairie. And it was a concoction of opium and alcohol and red pepper.
And it was originally brewed at the Plainview, Minnesota home of one Joseph Ray Watkins. JR's potent liniment was a hit among area farmers. He made a name for himself and his product based on a fairly simple premise.
He guaranteed his product, and he's recognized as having the first trial mark bottle with the money-back guarantee. So you could use that liniment up to that line on the back of the bottle, and if you weren't completely satisfied, he would return your money to you, no questions asked.
By 1885, JR changed the name of the firm to the J.R. Watkins Medical Company and moved the growing business to Winona. Another Watkins idea? Hire an army of traveling salesmen who'd fan out across rural areas selling Watkins products.
There was a code of conduct that they had to adhere by. But these gentlemen who went around to these farms were not only salesmen, they also brought the local news from the other farms. They often had the same route for 20, 30 years, and they became family friends.
The Watkins man became a rural American icon. His store on wheels smelled of liniment and salve, soaps, spices, and extracts.
The vanilla bottling machine is a modern mechanical marvel.
The product line grew to include medicines, cosmetics, animal feed, spark plugs, car tires, even embalming fluid. Almost anything you wanted, Watkins had.
Back then, the motto of the company was the store at your door. People didn't come into town very often, and a lot of those rural areas, you get out into the Dakotas or Oklahoma, they did not have much of a product selection. So you might be able to find a few of your basic needs, but you might not be able to find everything you're looking for. So JR offered to bring the store to you. Let us do the work for you.
The products Watkins sold were, and still are, made in Winona at a sprawling facility that takes up a full city block. According to the Watkins Company historian, Watkins' worldwide success turned it into a big tourist destination. Nearby Highway 61 helped bring in visitors. In 1 year alone, 250,000 people toured the Winona plant. Visitors saw how various products were made and marveled at the building itself.
In this building, he spared no expense. He brought in marble from Italy. He had a lot of stained glass windows. He brought in the craftsmen to do the tile mosaics. And it was a statement. It was a statement that he was successful. It was a statement of quality. And at that time, it was considered the greatest private office building in the world. That's according to the company.
J.R. Watkins didn't live to see his magnificent building. He died in 1911. Today, the Watkins Building is on the National Register of Historic Places. J.R. probably would be pleased by that, and that his firm is thriving, still making as many as 350 products to serve another generation of customers. If this little road off of Highway 61 in Homer looks familiar to some of you, you are probably dating yourself. In the 1950s and 60s, thousands of elementary school kids made field trips to this area to see a long-gone attraction, Emil Lear's Otter Sanctuary.
They'd bring busloads in from all over, sure. Gosh, it was like 25 cents to get in, I guess.
This was Emil's front yard, the backwaters of the Mississippi River. Emil was a hunter and a trapper. His life changed one day when he found a female otter in his trap. Her frantic pups were nearby. Those pups kind of became the Adam and Eve of the nation's first trained otter farm.
We got the one to retrieve, and he taught him to come to the whistle, and follow him, and he'd take him and had no problem with letting him loose along the streams and calling him back.
Emil became the first to breed otters in captivity. He discovered the playful critters are smart and trainable. Bud Safranek, who used to hunt with Emil, says he couldn't believe what Emil had trained the otters to do. They'd act like dogs, fetching and retrieving ducks and performing other tricks. The otters were a huge hit, traveling the country and performing with the former trapper from Homer, Minnesota.
He was on the cover of Life magazine. He had these posters up, and he traveled all over the United States and got to know many people.
The steep sandy dunes look like snow to them.
Emil got to know noted newspaper sports writer Grantland Rice, who did this movie short on Emil's famous otters.
They quickly learn that they can slide through the shallow water and be their own surfboards.
And pretty soon, Hollywood beckoned for Emil. He became a consultant for Walt Disney's nature movies.
This water world was the otter's playground.
Emil, a conservationist, also wrote a number of books in an effort to educate kids about wildlife, especially about otters.
He did well because he taught kids at the same time that he showed them the otter.
The otters and Emil were nearly inseparable.
He'd have him in the house. He'd be on the Davenport, and they'd be go over and drink out of the toilet. Well, see, he got next to his animals.
Yes, Emil was close to his otters, maybe a little too close at times. Bud Safranek, whom Emil called Kid, remembers seeing the older man one day with a bandage on his nose. And Bud said,
"What the hell happened to your nose?" He said, "Nothing, kid." I said, "I'll bet you were kissing an otter and he got you, didn't he?" He says, "Don't you ever tell anybody that." He bit him on the end of the nose.
Emil Lears died in 1975 at the age of 85. The sanctuary did not live on. Today, all that's left is what you see here. But it's no stretch to say that Emil Lears was a key figure in restoring this country's otter population and reminding us just how important and cute these little critters can be.
We're heading into the last stop on Highway 61 in Minnesota, La Crescent. La Crescent got its name from the fact that it sits on a big crescent-shaped bend on the Mississippi River. The city is just ahead on Highway 61 as it snakes along the river. To the left, that's I-90 as it heads into Wisconsin. La Crescent proudly owns the designation of being the apple capital of Minnesota.
There's little doubt the apple is tops here in La Crescent. Every fall, the town celebrates its apple growing heritage with a big festival and, of course, the King Apple Parade. It's been this way since 1949. And since they were little kids, Cindy Harris Steinhoff and her brothers have come out to watch the parade. The Harris name means a lot in this town. Cindy's great-great-grandfather, John Harris, was the first to successfully grow apples in the La Crescent area. That was in 1856.
It was a big deal because everybody said that apples could not be grown here. The winters were way too harsh. John S. Harris was an experimentalist. He tried many different times, didn't give up, kept going, persevered, planted different varieties, and he finally made it work.
And Harris became known as the father of the orchardists because of his successful efforts. His apple trees eventually grew into a key industry in La Crescent, and he became a founding member of the Minnesota Horticultural Society.
This picture is a photo of Harris Orchard.
The Harris family orchard was joined by nearly 40 other apple growers in the heyday of the La Crescent apple industry. Hundreds of thousands of bushels of apples came out of these valleys. Now, there are only about 8 orchards.
But like we say, it's not the volume, it's the quality of apples that we raise. And here on the limestone hills that we live on, we're not just an apple. Our apples take on very unique flavors.
The distinctive flavors of La Crescent's apple varieties are due in part to location. Good soil and normally favorable weather conditions in the valleys contribute to bumper crops of apples.
We're right on the Mississippi River, the backwaters of the lock and dam, and we get that little buffer of temperature of 2 to 3 degrees. And in the springtime when we have full bloom, 2 to 3 degrees can be a difference of freezing and not freezing.
Bernie Bueller runs the venerable Lytle's Apple Orchard. It's been around since 1917. Lytle's Orchard and its apple stand on Highway 61 are familiar sights in this part of the region.
Apples are still very important. It's a drawing card for our community. We have the distinction as the apple capital of Minnesota. It does draw people into the area, and it helps the economy.
Happy Apple Fest, everybody!
Thankfully, John Harris's experiments were fruitful, much to the delight of his descendants and generations of La Crescent residents.
I don't think I've missed an Apple Fest since I've been born. So it's really, it gives me pride, and it makes me happy to think that my great-great-grandfather started all this. We wouldn't have an Apple Fest without him.
And as for Bertie Bueller, it's not only the apples that are important to him, it's the magic of this place.
I really feel privileged to be able to live a life to enjoy all these beauties of nature. And once people come down here for the first time, we get them back.
Well, we're at the end of our tour. From here, Highway 61 goes into Wisconsin. It takes a dipsy-doodle back and forth from Illinois to Iowa, goes down to St. Louis, Memphis, and then on to New Orleans. You know, one of the reasons we've taken this trip in the footsteps of those who wrote the WPA Road Guide is to continue the tradition those writers started some 70 years ago, telling stories. Stories of an iconic highway, stories of special places in Minnesota that need to be cherished long into the future. Some of those places are already gone. Others have just taken a different form. And there's no doubt that this highway will continue to evolve and change in the years to come. What was it that Bob Dylan wrote? I always felt like I could go anywhere from Highway 61. I think he's right about that. Happy travels. We'll see you again soon and bring you more tales of the road.
Major funding for Tales of the Road, Highway 61, has been provided by SMEAD, located along Highway 61 in Hastings, keeping you organized at home and at work, on the web at smead.com. Flint Hills Resources, producing transportation fuels for Minnesota and the upper Midwest at our Rosemount refinery, on the web at fhr.com. Generous individual support by Sharon and Terry Avent, Vance Opperman, Ken and Nina Rothschild. Additional funding has been provided by Winona State University, a community of learners improving our world, on the web at winona.edu, and Visit Winona, the historic island city, on the web at visitwinona.com.